to start off the day, we have a panel discussion titled Farm Digitization in Canada. So I want to introduce our panelists now and the topic for the day, Farm Digitization in Canada. We have Ken Jackson, CEO of VeriGrain, Bryan Prystupa, Senior Product Owner, FCCAgExpert, and Jesse Hirsh, Futurist and Digital Strategist. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here today. Ken, you have a presentation. So as we want to let everybody introduce themselves, and we'll get into the topic of digitization. So we'll start with you, Ken.
Sure. Again, Ken Jackson. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of VeriGrain. Are we going to do all the introductions and then
you go ahead.
Do my thing? Okay. I'll roar through a little bit of a background on VeriGrain. So VeriGrain is effectively about a 2.5-year-old company, and we rolled out, actually officially we launched the project at the start of 2020, and everyone knows how the last 2 years have gone. So we kind of pulled our horns in and came back out of the gate this year very successfully, and like I say, it's not bragging if it's true. We got a very prestigious award from the AE50 in North America, and then the Davidson Award, and then we got this really cool award at the show here. So it's been a great start to the year for us, and we're quite excited as a company. So what we do is essentially address this issue that MNP did some research a few years ago and determined that your average grower doesn't know within about 10% what they have stored for volume on their farm, and generally even less about the quality of that grain. So, you know, the problem that causes is that for growers, again, if you don't know what you've got, how can you get, you know, optimal value for it? Spoilage losses are still, you know, higher than they should be, but also for buyers, the inefficiencies that they're dealing with on sample handling and grain coming in that doesn't meet spec is costing them money. And now we've got this sort of data requirement for things like traceability, sustainability, carbon as well. So VeriGrain has created this sort of information bridge between the grower and the buyer, which, and I won't go through all the detail on it, but sorry, I'm going to back up one here. Oh, no, we are missing oh no, that's the right slide, sorry. Which essentially starts with getting ensuring that a representative sample is taken, using a phone app to digitize that information, so ensuring that the sample there's integrity when it gets to the point of being analyzed. The analysis can then be, accurate and meaningful and trusted, so that there's just better information to sell the grain on. And then lastly, that what gets delivered actually meets the specification and everybody's happy and you don't have to have those awkward discussions at the elevator. So there's also a lot of information, again, around grain quality and quantity, which feeds a lot of other software platforms, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, so I won't go into detail, but just for example, is on-farm inventory. Currently it can lag and be incorrect because it doesn't get in real time, and so we help that to happen. We help it to be accurate as well. Sorry, the monitors lag a little bit here. So what VeriGrain is it's this much needed new standard for sample acquisition, data, and the information management around that. And we've got a number of tools that all sort of go together to make that happen. And without getting into detail here, I'd be happy to tell you after the show at the VeriGrain booth. So the thing that really distinguishes VeriGrain from anything else out there is that we're able to provide the most real-time, most accurate information for on-farm stored grain quality and quantity. And the way we do that is because we're getting that information at the time it's being sampled. So it is very much a real-time information generation. So kind of very quickly here, the value to the grower, of course, is that if you know with greater detail and certainty what you have, you can go find that optimal pricing and buyers that are trust that that's what you're going to deliver. The traceability factor is there. Also, the buyers really like it because, again, they've got more confidence. that what they're buying is going to get delivered, and it allows them to operate more efficiently as well. So it's really, it's a win for the grower and a win for the buyer. And that's my story.
Thanks a lot, Ken. I feel like VeriGrain might single-handedly obliterate the 5-gallon pail.
We're just trying to make it a better 5-gallon pail with a barcode on it, yes.
A better 5-gallon pail. Thanks, Ken. And you can find VeriGrain's booth just over here in the same room. Brian, let's move to you. Tell us a little bit about you, your agriculture background, and your connection with AgExpert.
Awesome. Well, yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I was joking with Ken and Jesse that I don't have the most exciting origin story. I was born and raised in Regina here. A little bit further down the value chain, my parents owned a wholesale and distribution company for fresh produce. So I wasn't on tractors and dirt bikes like your kiddos there, but I was on forklifts and semi-trucks, causing issues there, or delivering produce all over southern Sask. I got my master class in agriculture by joining a career with FCC, where I've had roles in lending, working directly with farmers and customers. I've worked in national strategic marketing initiatives, and now I've been with the AgExpert team for just about a year now. And there, like for over 20 years, AgExpert has been on a mission to help farmers digitize their farm records, both in accounting and what's happening in the field. And now with modern technology and advancements in how that's going, we have an overarching use case where we're trying to help our customers enter their information once and use it in multiple channels, tools, applications, so that my role is to work with like-minded companies who want to connect that data in a safe and secure way, without compromising data security or anything like that, and ultimately making life easier for a farmer.
Very good. Thanks, Brian. And over to you, Jesse.
Do you mind if I stand up?
No, by all means. If you got a leg cramp, I think you should dance it out.
And I figure I'll tell a crazy story in hopes that we might draw more people in.
Good. Let's do it.
In 1993, my older brother, who was an engineer, completing his master's degree, said, "Come here, kid. Look at this. It's called the internet." And it blew my mind. And all of a sudden, I spent 6 to 9 months completely immersed in the internet until one night there was a knock on the door. I go downstairs and I open the door to my parents' house, and there were 3 detectives who said, "Are you Jesse Hirsh?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Do you know what a hacker is?" And I said, "Of course, everybody knows what a hacker is." And they said, "You're under arrest for violation of section 342.2 of the Canadian Criminal Code, unauthorized access of a computer." Of course, instantly my face went blank, and I thought, I really hope they don't go upstairs and look at my marijuana stash on my desk. Fortunately, they didn't, and instead brought me direct to the police station. And it turned out that my brother did not have permission to let me use his internet account. Right? I didn't know what hacking was. I didn't know how to hack. I was just using my internet, my brother's account, to use the internet. Now, thankfully, the police took some empathy on me. Unfortunately, the court did not, because I was technically in violation of the law. So I have the honor of saying I am one of the first people charged in Canada for hacking, even though I had no idea how to hack. Of course, the irony is I then learned pretty quick and fast. I started recognizing the power of technology, the power of data, and back in the early 90s, I could walk into any room and go, "Hi, I'm Jesse, I'm from the internet." And everyone would be like, "We better listen to that guy. He's got something important to say." And I started to realize that the internet's this great big learning curve. There's no finish line. There's nobody said, "Okay, I finished, it's done." No, there's always new apps, new services, new technology. So I spent a couple of decades on that learning curve, and as long as I was learning faster, and as long as I was getting knowledge that people wanted, I could learn it, turn it around, and sell it, and have a pretty good career. Now, meanwhile, I kept hearing about these things called futurists. And at the time, I kept thinking futurists, they were con men. They were full of it. Until somebody told me how much futurists make, and then I became a futurist. Which is to say to all of you, there is no barrier to entry to becoming a futurist. And if you look at the accuracy record of futurists, it's pretty much on par with weather forecast. I can maybe tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. People under 30 get in free thanks to FCC. I could maybe tell you what's going to happen next week. It's probably going to rain. But what's going to happen a year from now, 10 years from now, it's anybody's guess. But as a futurist, people kept inviting me to conferences, inviting me to events, saying, hey, Jesse, where's the internet leading us? Where's technology leading us? And I got lots of ideas that I'm happy to share, which we will. But then I started ending up at farming conferences. And in fact, it was about 10 years ago here in Regina that FCC invited me to talk, and I started meeting farmers. And all of a sudden, I had this epiphany that all farmers are futurists. Because think about it, what does a farmer do except anticipate how their crops are going to perform, anticipate the demand for their livestock. So here I was as a futurist, feeling like I was a bit of an imposter, meeting real futurists, and that's when I started to fall in love. Fall in love with land, fall in love with animals, fall in love with heavy equipment. And that's when I realized I wanted to be a farmer. So about 5 years ago, thankfully before the pandemic, I sold my house in Toronto and bought a small, modest 25-acre farm in Eastern Ontario. As a first-generation farmer who's allergic to debt, that of course means that it's a very modest operation. But again, my business is knowledge. So if I accept the idea that my farm is an experimental farm, and the primary crop that I harvest from my farm is knowledge, well, that changes my business model entirely. Partly because I'm conscious of the fact that farmers buy retail and sell wholesale, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But it made me think, how do I use knowledge, how do I use technology to not only make my farm profitable, but to help other farmers be profitable? Now, as an aside, one of the things I did was install 25 closed-circuit television cameras throughout my farm, partly so that we could monitor our livestock and we could monitor our property. And if any of you have been on Twitch, the live streaming service, well, the Academy of the Impossible might be lurking in your channel, and if you click on that, you'll find my farm. Streaming 24/7 and actually generating a reasonable amount of revenue because we're monetizing the video data that we get for our farm for the joy of people around the world. All to say that I'm so thrilled to be here today, and I'm so thrilled to be a farmer because it allows me to do what I always wanted to do with the internet, which is always be learning. Because if I think about what farming is, and I think about what farmers are, it's systems and hackers, right? Farming is a series of systems that you're constantly iterating and making better to help your operations. And the farmer is, in essence, a hacker who's constantly improving those systems, making the most of the tools and technology that they get access to. And that's why, thankfully, thanks to Ken, I've found what I'm going to do until I die, and it's farming.
That's awesome. Very good. A round of applause for all three of them. Well done, you guys. That's a great way for us to start the topic of farm digitization in Canada. So I think before we start, I'd love to hear from you your own version of what digitization is, because when I was running around yesterday talking to some farmers about what was on the launch pad today, everybody seems to have their own definition of what digitization actually means or is as it relates to agriculture. Ken, how do you see digitization as it relates to the farm?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm going to pass along a bit of a variation on a quote that I got from Kevin Blair, who said, data is getting to be a bit of a four-letter word on the farm. We don't need more data, we need more actionable information. So that said, I guess from my perspective as a CEO of an ag tech company, digitization is again essentially turning that information, whether it's in the field or out of the after harvest, again into a digital environment, so that it can be shared and utilized. We really as agriculture has become a very globally interactive business, and so the technology is such that how you get paid is pretty much digital these days. How you put your grain is pretty much digital, and again, from our perspective, we're trying to close this information gap between the field and with a digital technology. So that's my look.
Awesome. Yeah, I think digitization to me is taking information that we've historically stored up here on a piece of paper and translating that into just the different record-keeping tools, applications, software that you can turn it into data. I think it's going from the transition of trusting your gut or using your gut to make decisions to using that data and relying on that data to make those decisions. So one of my favorite things that I reference is Moneyball. If anyone's familiar with that book or that movie, the whole premise behind that is Billy Beane wanted to get away from baseball players and what people thought baseball players were for hundreds of years. He wanted to use data to make a championship team, essentially. And if there's any Leafs fans in the crowd, I think that's what Kyle Dubas is trying to do right now. I don't know how that's working out, but anyway, it's finding a way to take that information, translate it into data, and then make better decisions out of that. So that's exactly what AgExpert is trying to do. We want to serve all that information. We want to get accurate information that is still entered manually. It's coming off equipment, sensors, weather stations, storing it into one centralized system of other ag data transparent companies, so that the data can kind of speak for itself. So you, instead of, again, trusting your gut, maybe you have the information telling you, this is a year that I upgrade my equipment, or based on the cost of production that we have here, it's a year that we do repairs again, or maybe it's a decision whether you spray fungicide or not. Those are the things that we're trying to arm our users with through data, through taking that information and translating it.
I think it's important to recognize that digitization is fundamentally about control and accountability. And that's part of why I think a lot of people are naturally skeptical, because it can mean external control and external accountability. Because I think the important thing to recognize about digitization is it requires a certain amount of literacy, that you need to understand your systems, you need to understand your technology, or it can be used against you. So when we say that digitization is about control and accountability, it's important then to ask to whom, right? Is it accountable to me? Am I able to control it? Or is it accountable to someone else or controllable by someone else that I don't want? And I think that's really important. But I think it is possible to push back a little, to combine data and instinct, to combine data and the wisdom that farmers get from lived experience. Because when you compare the two, often you're reinforcing your instinct and you're using the data as verification, as an accountability for the things you know that works, and then it helps you tell others, hey, here's the data that proves my instincts are sound.
Yeah, it's a good point, Jesse. And so from a farmer's perspective, you talked about systems, and like there's no two farmers that show up here at this show that are the same, and no two farms that are the same. But we all have a current system. And the system might be writing it down on a piece of paper. It might be in our head. It might be in our grandpa's head and our dad's head and our mom's head and all of those things. But it's a system. And what is challenging for us is there's new systems and new ideas coming at us. It doesn't, from my perspective, feel like farmers were asking for a new system, and maybe some of them were. It doesn't feel like as a whole, farmers were saying, oh, this isn't working for us. Please, somebody from the technology industry, save us. It's a little bit of a push at us. And so now we're faced with a lot of options in front of us versus our current system that feels comfortable. So what advice would each of you give to farmers who are reluctant to step away from their current system that is comfortable? And it's not like we need something else to do. That's the other challenge, is a new system requires a lot of time and energy and dollars, and we'll get into all of those. What advice would you give to a farmer who is still reluctant to give up the comfort of their existing system?
Sure. Well, I think it's the big driver is that, you know, as we're all seeing the cost of inputs, the cost of machinery, everything keeps on going up, and we've seen this blip in the value of grain, but historically those two tracks have not always gone together, and so it's not a want to, it's a have to, and so, you know, it's just, you know, as we've seen over the years, farmings have gotten much larger, and so kind of, you know, keeping it in your head doesn't work anymore if you're, you know, anything over, you know, a couple of thousand acres. So, the beauty of digitizing and why it's, you know, it's something you've got to do is that as you grow and as you need to be more and more competitive, you can't just do all that in your head anymore, and so that's what those systems do for you. So again, also do appreciate that I think someone once told me that your average grower has to make 180 individual important decisions every year, and so. You know, I mean,
Did you say
massive.
every day?
Oh, sorry, yes, yeah. Well, not including the children, but yeah. So it just becomes it's a daunting task that you simply need assistance with, and that assistance comes in the form of technology. And I think we're now at a point where the technology is advancing, and I think maybe we'll get into this a little later, so I won't expand on it, but to where things are starting to work together better, and I think that's super important because we need to get past that. As Cheryl, you said, there's no two farms that have the same system, and so hopefully, and Bryan and I have had some conversations about this as well. So anyway, I'll pass that over.
Any advice?
I mean, I'll say something pretty provocative, but I think if people think about it, it's not that provocative. There's no such thing as unbiased data, right? Data always has an agenda. Data always reflects the bias of whoever created it. So if you're the one collecting data about your operations, it'll reflect your agenda. It'll reflect your story, and hopefully it'll defend your interests. But if that data is collected by people who are hostile to you, if that data is collected by people who want to make money off of you, that data may not be in your interest. They may miss out data that you think is important. They may miss out context that you think is important. So I empathize greatly with the sentiment, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But I think the reality is we've entered into a new court of public opinion, in which all industries, but especially agriculture, will receive a lot of scrutiny. And just as you want to have a lawyer, if you unfortunately find yourself in a court of law, you want to have your own data in the court of public opinion so that you can show that you are a responsible person. So I don't see data so much as making your systems better. I see data as proactively protecting yourself and proactively protecting your operations, because increasingly it is a kind of he said, she said, and you want to make sure that you've got your story and the proof to demonstrate that your operations are what you believe them to be.
Yeah, sorry, Bryan, did you have a comment on that too?
No, just completely agree with Ken and Jesse here. My only piece of advice would be what's getting in the way. Ask yourself that. If there's something that you're feeling reluctant on, hone in on that and go to some of these solutions providers and ask how they can mitigate that for you. I think it's as simple as that with advice I'd offer.
I heard the words "prove it" a couple of times already today, and that's where farmers are feeling a little bit on the defense, because we're out there making the best decisions that we can. You know, sustainability is this new buzzword, when for hundreds of years, you know, farmers have been making good decisions. 100 years we've been making good decisions, and we don't feel like we need to prove it to anyone. And yet there's a lot of scrutiny. A lot of people in government are looking at agriculture to prove it. So for farmers, we're feeling like a lot of the data collection opportunities out there are a bit intrusive. It feels like private information to us. You know, we're probably the nastiest to the Statistics Canada callers, is farmers, because they ask some what we deem to be really intrusive questions. And data collection feels to us very intrusive. And farmers can tend to be quite private, and we're not doing a lot of data sharing before this. So when somebody asks us not only to collect it and prove it and then give it or sell it to somebody else, this is brand new to the production piece of agriculture. Any comments about how we can reduce the feeling that the defense mechanism that we feel, and any comments about us feeling that this is a bit intrusive?
I'm happy to validate. I'm happy to say I think those are very fair concerns. Those are legitimate concerns. And I think there is a danger of data being used against farmers. And that's why, number one, I think farmers should control their own data, right? Like, I'm saying on the one hand, document what you do so you can defend yourself, but then you can decide who to share it with, right? And there are privacy laws in this country which are potentially getting stronger. So if you did the collection, you control where the data goes, versus if one of your suppliers or providers does the data collection, you have no control, and that data can be used. But then think one step higher. Think about growers' associations, right? Think about your neighbors. Think about forming cooperatives. So together you can collect data and, again, protect it. And make sure that you don't share it with people you don't want to, so that, for example, if the government comes calling, you can say, well, why do you want that data, right? And you can negotiate. You can actually have a little bit of pushback. We are entering into a world of transparency. And I think that that is a legitimate concern of apprehension. But that's why it's important to be proactive and think of data security and data protection, because these are trade secrets, right? This is vulnerable information. And unfortunately, the longer you defer thinking about these policy issues and thinking about your own data practices, the easier it is for someone like the government, or if you think about contract farming, right? The people who are employing, the people who are buying your products, they may start to be the ones pressuring for this data, and you want to anticipate that and make sure that you, A, control your data and control access to that data so you can mitigate some of these very legitimate concerns.
Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. No. As a farmer, I think the first question I would ask with concerns to data collection with some of these software solutions is asking them the question: how are you protecting my data? How is it being shared? Is it being shared? Put the questions out there, and if you don't like the answer that you receive, then the data is yours and you don't have to move forward. Again, for CFSAgExpert, we're Ag Data Transparent certified, and if that's the first time you're hearing that, that doesn't mean that you need to be scared that we're collecting your data. What Ag Data Transparency means is we are transparent with the way your data is being collected and being used. You have 100% control of your data in our software, and you have 100% control with who it gets shared with, how it gets shared with. All we're trying to do is make it easier for farmers to centralize that data, again, so that they can make better business decisions. What they do with it from there is completely up to them.
And Ken, for VeriGrain system, the farmer buys that VeriGrain system and they own that data and they keep it to themselves?
Absolutely, yeah. And we're in a rather unique position in that I mentioned earlier. We're actually, the data we're collecting and the information we're collecting is the most accurate, most real-time on-farm stored grain quality and quantity, which, if you think about it for a moment, that's hugely valuable, not just to the grower, but potentially to others within the industry. But we have a very deep line in the sand that we will never share that grower data with an industry partner. Now, a couple of examples though where it's in the growers, to the growers' benefit to allow that data to be sort of accessed, if you will, on an aggregated basis without giving anything away is, again, because our platform sees a lot better, a lot broader information than literally any of or most of the grain companies. What we're planning to do is allow a grain company to say, hey, we're looking for this kind of grain and this quality of grain. And so we can then look at our database of growers and forward that sort of, if you will, request through. So we're not giving away anything on an individual grower, but then now the grower will get a request saying, hey, XYZ grain company is looking for this kind of grain, and if you're interested, just click here, and you can talk directly to them. So it's essentially a dating service. It doesn't give anything away, but it does, again, provides a very, very valuable service to, between the growers and the buyers, well, I'll just leave that as sort of the one example. So I think, to make sure that, I think there needs to be a perspective here that, that information you're collecting, that data you're collecting as a grower, is enormously helpful and valuable to running your operation. And if you choose to share that outside, there's some good reasons to do that, and that's great. But don't sort of avoid being digital because of the rest of the world. I mean, do it very selfishly because it's going to make you it's going to help make you much more efficient. It's going to make you more profitable. This is I guess my personal perspective on it.
You heard it here first. There's a Tinder for quality grain. I didn't even know that. There's a couple of microphones here, and so by all means, if you have any questions for the panelists, feel free to step up, and we're happy to answer your questions. Gentlemen, the cost of data collection isn't free, and farmers are inundated with various aspects of collecting data, whether it's on the financial side, the cash flow management side, on the grain sampling side. Absolutely every aspect we're being asked to collect data, and none of that is free. So is there a way, and Jesse, you talked about a revenue source for the digitization that you have. I'm wondering if you see, in the future, a revenue source for farmers for collecting their data.
So the short answer is yes, but the detail, of course, is how much.
Do we have to have cameras up all over our farm?
No, not necessarily, but I will point out cameras are the easiest way to collect data, right? And increasingly there's AI. Part of the reason I set up my cameras is I wanted to use AI image recognition on my animals, right? And try to see how I could use AI to monitor the health of my animals. But I think there's 3 easy answers to how we can generate money from our data. On a base level is data as a commodity, and I don't think that that'll ever be more than fractions of a penny, but there is a market for it. And that is why anyone who is currently collecting data from your heavy equipment, from your soil, from your livestock, they are making money off that data, but it's fractions of a penny. So it has to be at really large volume for the farmer to see any cut. The second was, yes, as media, and there certainly are ways in which you can make money off media and attention. But the third, and I would argue the most lucrative, is marketing. And it's interesting the way in which farmers are using data, either at scale, in terms of, as Ken was talking about, demonstrating that, let's say, their crops are high quality, or as part of their animals or part of their produce, creating relationships with their customers. So I get my beef from an operation called Corad Farms, and they not only really allow people to connect with their cattle, which is a particular heritage breed, but they own their own abattoir, right? So they also are fully integrated, and their transparency and their sharing of their data actually engenders customer loyalty. Because you feel a connection to the farmer, you feel a connection to their produce. I pay more from my beef because I'm happy to support the farmers who produce it. And I think that is the ultimate payoff of data, is thinking about how it goes into your marketing, into your relationship to the marketplace, either to the consumer or to the buyers who are buying your stuff. And I think that'll either be bad or ideally good, because you're thinking about how to demonstrate your value and your expertise.
Any other thoughts on data collection not being free?
I'll hit this one from a little different perspective, and this is a bit self-serving, so bear with me. If you're already sampling, which especially if you're into specialty grains where understanding quality, sampling is required, traceability is required. Our product actually makes it easier to collect the data. It sort of saves money. But on the flip side of that is you're actually realizing more value for, more revenue for that grain. So in fact, that data is helping, you are actually getting paid for that data. So I realize that you were asking in a little bigger perspective in terms of, but even again, I kind of focus right down into, two things we always try to do or look at when we're developing product is it's got to be, faster and easier, and it's got to make farmers more money, or it's not going to work. So, again, always looking at the grower. I think there is some bigger applications as well. One of the other situations I was going to mention earlier too was that as a grower that's part of sort of our ecosystem, if you get to see, again, on an aggregated basis, on a regional basis, what else is out there in terms of quality or quantity. Again, not specific growers, but just a real simple example. I mean, if you can see that sort of what's stored on the farm in terms of number one wheat, for example, is starting to get low, but you've got some pretty good number two, well, you're probably going to sit on it for 2 or 3 or 6 months because you're going to get a higher price for it. But you have to know what's going on in the market to pull that one off. So, there is real value, and again, we've got to be super careful and conscious of the security of that data, but that data can be very, very valuable to the growers at a marketing level, as Jesse mentioned, and at a buyer level as well. So.
Bryan, CFSAgExpert's been collecting data for 20 years. Is there some efficiencies that have been gained in general over the course of those 20 years of farmers collecting their data?
For sure. I kind of spoke to this at the beginning, but just around the modern advancements in all ag tech and how all of the field data coming straight from your equipment can now be uploaded right into our software. This used to be something that was very manual entry, and it still is in some cases, and that's totally fine. But it just makes things much, much, much more efficient. And so if we're looking at examples of all of the field data coming off, any way that we can automate that and have it automatically upload into our software, and again, have it centralized in one place, means less desk or office time for you, the farmer. And so that is one of the huge, huge benefits. So if we're looking at, again, inventory in our product, and if we were to have an established connection with VeriGrain, where they have all the quantity and quality measures that they're pulling off, but then if Ken's application and our application can talk to each other and have that centralized, and now everything coming from the bins, from the equipment, from the sensors is being located in one spot, that gives you a much, much more accurate picture of what's happening on your farm financially, and again, can help enable more strategic business decisions. So when it comes to the cost of data collection, nothing is free. If something is free, you're the product, right? So I think you, the farmer, need to ask yourself, what's the value here? And it's up to people like me and Ken and everyone here to demonstrate that value and prove that value.
I think there's a larger question really about trust that we've sort of been getting at repeatedly. And I think that was my point earlier about intuition, that I don't see data and intuition or information and wisdom as being separate. I think the point of these systems is to build upon a farmer's intuition, to build upon a farmer's wisdom, and to give life to it, to demonstrate it. And that's where I see the value of data, and that's why I keep saying it should be the farmer's data, and it should reflect the farmer's story and the farmer's worldview and the farmer's agenda, what they want to do with their crops and their livestock. And I think from the farmer's perspective, that might be a psychological shift, right? Where they accept the idea that data is their crop, right? And the tools that make the data are part of their operations. And that's why I embrace the hacker ethos, right? Because that's how the hacker thinks. And that's why I encourage farmers to think of themselves as hackers when it comes to both their data and their technology.
Jesse, you mentioned the word trust. So we've been talking about, farmers trusting technology companies with their data, the secure piece, the fear, all of that. There's also another area of trust that we deal with in the agriculture industry, and that's with the general public. The consumers tend to be asking a lot more questions now. They're very, very interested in their food. There was a time where there was no such thing as a foodie, and now people have business cards deciding that they're a foodie. So people are incredibly interested in their food, and they're somewhat interested in how it's grown, just enough to ask questions. So there's a general distrust between consumers and the industry. It's still showing through statistics that consumers trust farmers, but they don't trust industry. And industry doesn't trust, there's a whole cycle of untrustworthy bits of this puzzle. So is digitization going to confuse matters most, or is digitization a necessary step to building trust between consumers and farmers and industry?
I mean, the easy answer is it's both. And it really depends upon how you're relating to the public and who you're relating with. Because, I'll take TikTok, for example. I love TikTok and I love farm TikTok because you really get, I love the catastrophes, the failures, but the innovation, right? The quick fixes, the brilliance that many farmers have. But the danger of social media is it gives the illusion of depth, right? People think, oh, I saw a few farmers, I understand farming now. So on the one hand, it's a catch-22 where I always encourage farmers to embrace social media as a way to connect with other farmers and a way to tell your story. But you expose yourself to the public. You make yourself vulnerable. So the answer is to never do it alone, right? To find other farmers that you can do social media with, right? Both to promote each other, but also to learn, to get best tactics, best practices, and to put it in your marketing bucket, because you are marketing your brand, you're marketing your product, even if you don't sell direct to consumers, right? There are lots of people, one of the most celebrated people like Minnesota millennial farmer, right? Who, he's making so much money off YouTube right now, it's more than his agricultural operation. So there are benefits, but don't be isolated, right? Don't go to a fight alone, bring your buddies. Don't go to social media alone. Bring your family, bring your friends, so that together we can shift the perception of agriculture and help people understand not only do we really care about our work, we care about feeding the world, right? And I think we all recognize we're heading into a global food security crisis, which is why there's going to be a lot of tension on farmers. So we should be celebrating what we do and how we do it and not let other people set the agenda or their perceptions of us.
I'll jump in. I guess the sort of aspect of this question that comes to mind for me is, and that we encounter a lot, is traceability, which is becoming a more and more demanded by, again, the consumer wants to know, where did their food come from, and there's packaging now that allows you to, you can scan the QR code and see the field that it was growing on, and so I think that's there's more and more of that going to be happening. I don't know if it will be to that extent, but certainly traceability from a food safety perspective is also very important. And there's lots of the growers that I talk to, traceability is still something that's just starting to come. But the growers that are involved with the specialty crops, that's where traceability is a fact of life right now. That's again a very active discussion. There's also a sort of sustainability component, which is, the big companies, I hear them talking lots about sustainability. At a grower level, it's still, I'm not sure what that means for me, but it is coming in and is being driven to, I'd say, largely by the consumers who are saying, well, we've got to do things better. We've got, the world is coming apart, and we have to grow more food. And how do we do it? I mean, there's a lot of fear out there, and so though these things are being forced upon the growers, and again, it all comes down to, ties into this whole digital discussion. It's like, okay, how do I track, from the time this hits my fork back to where the seed came from? The only answer is it's got to be, the digital is a big component of that. So.
Yeah, I think all I would add to that, I think digitization is a link, but it's not the link. I completely agree with Jesse. I see it more as a marketing challenge or opportunity, and that's why groups like Egg More Than Ever exist, because this mob mentality has come out around the sensitivities with what's going in our bodies, and there's questions around that, and there's a lot of unknown, and there's a lot of education required. So exactly like Jesse said, like we want the best in our food. We want the best to help feed the world, and help take care of the food crisis and food insecurity. So yes, digitization can help with traceability in a sense, but I more so see it as a marketing problem and help educating those who need it.
Yeah, and I think for farmers, we're a little bit waiting in the wings now. We're a little bit gun shy, because when consumers started asking us a whole bunch of questions about the science behind what we were doing, we understood that they wanted the scientific data that they were asking for. So they had a ton of questions and concerns about glyphosate, and we went, oh, you're worried about glyphosate? Here's a 400-page study. It's sure to convince you. And then nobody read it, and they stuck to their own belief that a product like glyphosate was evil. And farmers went, well, you're asking us all of these questions. We're providing you with the answers, and it's not changing anything. So now we're kind of waiting to go, you guys decide. We believed us to be already making the best decisions that we can. We're growing healthy, safe, sustainable food the best that we can. So you guys need to figure out, the world needs to figure out what data they want from us so that we can continue to prove it. Because in our minds, having 4 or 5 generations of family farming the same land for more than 100 years, that is proving it, in our opinion. So we're waiting for some, something concrete that says, farmers, here's how you can show us.
I mean, it raises two interesting ideas. On the one hand, there's the myth that the data speaks for itself, because the data never speaks for itself. It needs you, farmer, to make that data sing. And that's where, to your last question, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there's going to be a moment where hey, farmers, we're ready for you, save the day. No, quite the opposite. We're going to need farmers to save the day, and there may not be any thank yous after the fact. And that's why I think it's so important to be proactive, right? To tell your story with pride. And as I'm saying, but I will repeat, stand your ground, right? And use your data to defend who you are and what you believe in. Because, to take carbon tax and environmental issues, farmers have a real opportunity for leadership. And that means that you say, here's why we're environmental stewards. And here's why we have, to your point, a track record, right, in taking care of the land. If you don't put forward that story, you'll get bad policy. And that's the catch-22, that you have to make the data sing. And you have to make your farm sing in the way that it's always sung, so that people will hear that tune and want to dance.
Gentlemen, this has been a great discussion about farm digitization. I hope you folks have enjoyed it. I'm sure all 3 of them will be available if you have any questions or comments afterwards. A big round of applause for Ken and Bryan and Jesse on farm digitization.
Thank you.